Welcome everyone to the very first official very lecture of Science Killa Medical Sciences by Dr. Habib. And yes, today we are going to start the very first topic, and that is about heart. And heart is the symbol of love. So actually we are going to start our journey with love. And in today's lecture we are going to cover mainly two things. Number one, anatomy of the heart, and number two, layers of the heart. Okay, first of all, let's have a brief introduction about the heart. Heart is located in the chest cavity, we also call it as thoracic cavity, and it is located in between the two lungs in another small cavity we call it as mediastinum, and it is located a little left to the breastbone. And the location of the heart in the mediastinum is such that, for example, this is our heart and this is the flat part of the heart. We call it as base. So it is directed towards the right shoulder, and the pointed end of the heart, we call it as apex, is directed towards the left hip. And the size of the heart is just like the size of a closed fist size. Remember, fish have 2 chambers of the heart, reptiles have 3, birds and human beings have 4 chambers of the heart. Okay, here you can see the big diagram of the heart, where this is the right side of the heart and this is the left side of the heart. So we have got here as the right side of the heart. So this is the right side of the heart, and this is the left side of the heart. Okay, the right side of the heart is divided into 2 chambers, the upper chamber and the lower chamber. So the upper chamber is called as atrium, and the lower chamber is called ventricle. Similarly, the left side of the heart is also divided into 2 chambers, the upper one and the lower one. So the upper one is called atrium and the lower one is called ventricle. So plural, the upper 2 chambers we call them as atria and lower ones ventricles. Singular, right atrium, right ventricle and left ventricle. Okay, so let's start from the very first chamber of the heart, and that is right atrium. From all over the body, the blood that has been used, we call it as deoxygenated blood, enters into the right side of the heart. So from the lower parts of the body, like from the lower limbs and other parts of the body, so the blood enters into the right atrium through this inferior big vein. We call it as inferior vena cava. So the blood from the lower parts of the body enters into the right atrium through this inferior vena cava. And from the upper parts of the body, like head, neck and upper limbs, so the blood that has been used in these parts of the body also enters into the right atrium through the superior vein. We call it as superior vena cava. So the blood will enter into the superior vena cava. Okay, from the heart muscle tissue itself, the blood that has been used also enters into the right atrium through this blood vessel. We name it as coronary sinus. Coronary sinus is the combination or group of all other veins that drain the blood into the right atrium, and these all are actually grouped together to form this blood vessel. We call it as coronary sinus. Okay, here in the right atrium we have got another important structure, and it is just beneath the superior vena cava. We call it as SA node. SA node is actually the pacemaker of the heart, and it has the capability to generate the action potentials or nerve impulses. That is called as automaticity of the heart, and that will be the part of our next lecture then. So this SA node is also situated here in the right atrium. Here we have got another structure, a kind of depression is over here. This is called as Fossa Ovalis. During fetal development, there is free blood flow between the right atrium and left atrium through a foramen ovale. So with development and with growth, foramen ovale, there is actually opening between the left and right atrium, so that is sealed up with the septum. So here a kind of depression remains over here, that is called as Fossa Ovalis. So this is actually the remnant. So let's recap it now. From all over the body, the blood that has been used will enter into the right atrium through the inferior and superior vena cavas and coronary sinus into the right atrium. Then from the right atrium, this deoxygenated blood, I have colored here as blue, will enter into the next chamber of the heart, into the right ventricle, and then from the right ventricle, the deoxygenated blood will enter into the pulmonary trunk. So this is called as pulmonary trunk. So before passing into the right ventricle, so here we have got one valve that separates the right atrium and the right ventricle. So here we have got the valve. So here is the valve. So this is between the right atrium and right ventricle. So this is called as Atrioventricular valve. As this is in the right side of the heart, that's why we call it as the right atrioventricular valve. As the right atrioventricular valve has got three cusps or three flaps. That's why the second name of this valve is called as tricuspid valve. Okay, the cusps of the valve is tightly positioned due to these nice blue collagen cords, and they are tightly anchored here with the muscles. And these muscles are called papillary muscles. So, and these blue ones over here, they are called as chordae tendineae. So what do we call these? Chordae tendineae. So these cusps or flaps of the valves are tightly positioned on their place by these thread-like collagen cords. We call them chordae tendineae, and these are linked to the papillary muscles. So the main function of the valve is that it provides the one-way flow of blood so that the blood should not flow back to the right atrium. So here again the same chordae tendineae, and they are bound here. They are bound here to the papillary muscles. Okay, before the blood entering into the pulmonary trunk, it also passes through one valve, and that is at the opening of pulmonary trunk. Here we have got valve. And this is just like half moon shape. That's why we call it as a semi-lunar valve. What do we call it, please? We call it semi-lunar valve. As this semi-lunar valve is at the opening of pulmonary trunk, that's why we also call it as pulmonary semi-lunar valve. So let's recap it now. Blood from all over the body will enter into the right atrium through inferior and superior vena cavas and through coronary sinus. Then the blood will pass to the right ventricle, passing through the tricuspid valve, and then the blood will enter in. The blood will be pumped into the pulmonary trunk by the right ventricle. And here I have got one very important thing. Here you can see, you can check the musculature of the heart, where in the ventricles the musculature or muscle composition is thicker than the atria, because the lower ventricles or lower chambers are high pressure chambers. So they have to pump the blood towards the lungs or towards all parts of the body then. So the blood in the right ventricle will be pumped into the pulmonary trunk, and this is divided into the left pulmonary artery and right pulmonary artery. So this deoxygenated blood will be carried to the lungs through right and left pulmonary arteries. So this pulmonary trunk is actually the only exceptional case that carries the deoxygenated blood. So the blood now will be carried towards the lungs, where the blood will get oxygenated, and this blood will be brought back to the heart, to the left side of the heart, through these big veins. Through these veins, and these veins are called pulmonary veins. So these are the left pulmonary veins, and these are the right pulmonary veins. So I have colored here these veins as red, because these veins are the only exceptional cases in all body that carries the oxygenated blood. So that's why I have colored here as red. So here the oxygenated blood will enter the left side of the heart through these veins. So actually, these right pulmonary veins, they do not enter into the right atrium. They go on the back side of the heart and they enter into the left atrium. Similarly, the inferior vena cava does not enter into the right ventricle. It goes on the back side of the heart and enters into the right atrium and drains the deoxygenated blood here. So the left and right pulmonary veins will bring the oxygenated blood and will drain into the left atrium. Okay, the blood, once it has come to the left atrium, will enter into the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle the blood will be pumped into the biggest artery of the body, which is called as aorta. What do you call it, please? We call it as aorta. We call it as aorta. Okay, so this blood will pass to the left ventricle, passing through one valve that is situated over here, that separates the left and left atrium and the left ventricle. So this is a valve over here. And this is the same valve like in the right atrium and right ventricle as in the right side of the heart. So this valve is called as atrioventricular valve. As this valve is present in the left side of the heart, we call it as left atrioventricular valve. And this valve has got two cusps or two flaps. That's why we call it as bicuspid valve. Or the third name of this valve is mitral valve. So again, let's recap it. These valve flaps are linked to the papillary muscles through chordae tendineae. So through chordae tendineae. So these are the papillary muscles, colored here as red, and these bluish lines are actually chordae tendineae. So here again we have got the chordae tendineae, and they are linked to the papillary muscles to anchor the flaps of the valves on their position. So the blood, the oxygenated blood entered into the left atrium will pass through the bicuspid valve and will enter into the left ventricle. And here this left ventricle has the thickest the thickest musculature composition through all over the heart, because this left ventricle has to pump the blood towards the all parts of the body. So that's why here muscle composition is very high. So then the blood will be pumped into the aorta, and here again we have got one valve at the opening of the aorta, and it's also like a half moon shape. That's why we call it as semilunar valve. And this is at the opening of aorta, that's why we call it as aortic semilunar valve. So you can remember now that there are 4 chambers of the heart: right and left atria, right and left ventricles, and there are 4 valves of the heart: the atrioventricular valves, the left and right atrioventricular valves, and semilunar valves, the aortic and pulmonary semilunar valve. Okay, aorta actually is the biggest artery of the body, and there are the 2 parts. This is actually the ascending part of the aorta that ascends, and this is a kind of elbow shape artery over here. We call it as aortic arch. What do we call it as? Aortic arch. And then this goes, this artery goes towards all parts of the body, and it delivers the blood to the all parts of the body through, another aorta, like we call it descending aorta. So it goes down then. Okay, here are 3 very, very important blood vessels arising from the aorta. Like we call it as, the first one over here, it's called as left subclavian artery, and the second one over here is called left common carotid artery, and the third one over here is called as brachiocephalic. Now you will ask the question, what the heck is worthier, that the left common and subclavian arteries are worthier? Where are the right ones? So this brachiocephalic actually divides into the right subclavian artery and into the right common carotid artery. Okay, so this was all about the heart and anatomy. Here we have got one very beautiful partition that actually separates the left and right ventricle, and here you can see another partition you cannot see. Actually, this is behind the aorta and pulmonary trunk, so that also divides the left and right atria. So this beautiful septum over here, this one, is called as interventricular septum. What do we call it, please? We call it as interventricular septum. What do you call it, please? We call it as interventricular septum. So we call it as interventricular septum. So yes, of course, here the blood pumped into the left ventricle will again will be pumped into the aorta. So this septum, plays very, very important role in the conduction of the nerve impulses. That will be actually the part of our next video lecture. And here another septum that is not visible over here is behind the pulmonary and aorta. So that is called as interatrial septum. What do you call that? Interatrial septum. Okay, now let's start the layers of the heart, and we will start from the inner side and we'll go to the outside of the heart then. Okay, there are 3 layers of the heart: inner endocardium, middle myocardium, and outer pericardium. Okay, the first layer here, it's colored as black, you can see here, is called as endocardium. Endocardium is actually composed of single layer of endothelial cells. And then the second layer, it is colored as red over here, is called middle myocardium. And myocardium is actually containing the main cardiac muscle tissue of the heart then. And this actually myocardium is responsible for the pumping action of the heart then. Okay, this third outer layer is called as, this is called as epicardium. This is called as epicardium. And you can, I must have the option of second name of this epicardium, of naming this, that's called as visceral layer of serous pericardium. So this is called as epicardium, and this is actually the second name of this layer is called visceral layer of serous pericardium. And then we have got over here as a kind of cavity or space. Here, this is actually the cavity, or this is actually the space. And this space or cavity is called pericardial cavity or pericardial space. So this space or cavity actually contains a fluid that is called as serous fluid. And this fluid provides the free movement of the heart while the heart is contracting and relaxing. If this serous fluid is low in quantity, then you will feel here as a stabbing pain. We call it as in the case of pericarditis. Okay, then next to the pericardial cavity, the next layer colored as black over here is called as parietal layer of serous pericardium. Parietal layer of serous pericardium. Okay, the outermost layer that is actually forming like the sac of the heart, this is called as fibrous pericardium. Fibrous pericardium. This is like fibrous. This is composed of fibrous connective tissue. And this is indistensible. That's why it provides a kind of protection, and it also prevents the heart from overstretching. And the second very important function of the fibrous pericardium is this, that it anchors the heart on its position then. Okay, so this was the outermost layer of the heart, and this is called as fibrous pericardium. And this inner parietal layer of serous pericardium is actually composed of mesothelium, and these mesothelial cells actually secrete the serous fluid. So this was all about the heart, where we learned about the four chambers of the heart and four valves of the heart, and there are three important layers of the heart, like inner endocardium, middle myocardium, and outer pericardium. And that outer pericardium is further composed of visceral layer of serous pericardium and parietal layer of serous pericardium. And this is also, second name of this is called as epicardium. So I hope you did enjoy, and if you did, please press the like button and the bell icon, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel and share this video. Thank you very much.